Nearly 20 years ago, Robb Dislear, a pioneer in the fight against HIV and AIDS, lost his own battle with the infectious disease. But almost 2 decades later, his story lives on. A mini-series called Robb's Life captured what became his most challenging and final year living with AIDS. I sat down with members of Robb's family, and they say even 20 years later, there's still an important message to be learned.
He was the life of the party.
Well, he was mischievous and loved to have a good time.
He could get away with anything and come out smelling like a rose.
Robb and his friends all sneaked out at night and went around East Moline and gathered up for sale signs. And they took them all and put them in front of the high school. Prom, he was dressed to the nines, and so was his date. And, you know, we had no clue, and I don't think Robb knew for sure. He might have been battling with it.
We had suspicions that Robb might be gay, but it didn't really matter to us. There was a lot of non-acceptance of gay, and there was a lot of fear of AIDS.
They said, well, we want you to follow someone here in the Quad Cities who has AIDS, and I said, well, who? Who do you have in mind? And Robb said, me. And my blood ran cold because I was looking at someone who looked so young and healthy, and yet he was telling me he was going to die on camera.
He was involved along all those 10 years, gay pride marches. In fact, I attended one, and I was a little embarrassed at the time because I'd never seen that before. And I got him aside and I said something. He said, Dad, this is the only way we're going to get awareness. So I kept my mouth shut from that on. And he was right.
I think there's still a lot of misunderstanding about HIV, about AIDS, about gay people. I think Robb can still help educate.
Just feeling so sad for him, you know, and realizing, I remember sitting on the couch realizing that Robb had helped 2 people die of this, and now he had it too.
It hurts. You're not supposed to bury your own kid.
In part 2 of Robb's Life, the 20th anniversary, we'll hear from Dr. Lewis Katz. He treated Robb back in the mid-'80s and is now one of the leading physicians for infectious diseases. Dr. Katz tells us just how close Robb came to benefiting from a major breakthrough in treatment for HIV and AIDS. That's in part 2 of Robb's Life, the 20th anniversary.
Hey, you're on TV. Is that mine?
AIDS brought gay people more into the limelight. When no one else would support us, we band together and we supported one another.
From the late 70s, early 80s, as the disease emerged until the mid-90s, treatment was not effective, period, end of story. Robb's illness played out during that part of the AIDS epidemic. It damages the immune system progressively over a period of years so that the immune system can no longer respond the way it's supposed to a wide variety of infections.
I lost my first friend in 1984. I worked in the gay bar for a number of years, and many friends disappeared over that period of time. The gay community came together and we started supporting our own because many people early on were abandoned by their families.
Their pill burden per day was a heaping double handful of pills. So imagine my hands with a big mound of pills. And that's what they took every day. Right about the time that Robb was entering the terminal phase of his illness was about the time that our ability to treat HIV changed absolutely dramatically had he gotten sicker a little bit later, or if the drugs had come a little bit earlier, things might have been different. They began turning HIV from a lethal, progressive infectious disease into a chronic, manageable illness we believe now is compatible with a normal lifespan.
Many people, when they are first diagnosed, they think this is the end of life, this is the end of the world, nobody's going to want to be bothered with me, the family is kicking me to the curb. We don't leave anybody. We make that walk with them.
There needed to be an agency that wasn't afraid of that diagnosis, that wasn't afraid of saying, come on in and we'll help you out. We started out with one facility named Robb's House. It has 5 bedrooms and it's more of a group living setting. This is meant to be a place of transition. People don't get HIV and die anymore, right? They get HIV and they get treatment and they live long, successful lives. It's not a death sentence.
It's a treatable infection. You know, I was getting paid to be a doc. That was my job. It wasn't Robb's job to do what he did. He was an eloquent spokesman in this community when there were few. Robb did hear what some of the early activists did in the coast, and it wasn't easy. There were people that didn't like Robb, ostracized both him, his family, and his friends as a result of his openness, but that's what we call pioneers.
In the final part of our series, we visit Robb's final resting place with Ken Gullett. He's the original creator of Robb's life and tells us about the drastic changes in his own life and his beliefs after documenting Robb's final year of life living with AIDS. That's in part 3, the 20th anniversary.
I grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s with all the prejudices of white people in the 50s and 60s. I was prejudiced against everybody at one point because that's what you're taught. I thought when I was 15, the coolest thing would be to join the KKK. The homosexuality thing is a very difficult hurdle to get over. We are taught that it's evil. I'll tell you how bad it was. I was doing Robb's life and went back to Kentucky for a party with some of my childhood friends. One of my good friends leaned over the table when we were talking about this, and he said, Ken, if I worked with someone and I knew he was gay, I would kill him. Now, he didn't use the word gay. Now, meeting Robb, I still felt anti-homosexuality feelings. I was definitely afraid of HIV. One of the first stories we shot was in his home, and he was cooking dinner. And he said, would you like some? I just froze inside. I thought, I'm going to catch HIV from his forks. And by the end of the series, when he was in the hospital, I was emptying a tray that he had thrown up in. It's easy to hate someone you don't know. And when you grow up in the 50s in the South and you're white and it's segregated, it's easy to hate black people because you don't know them. They aren't around you. They're not in your classroom. They don't sit with you in the theater. They don't swim in your pool. The same is true with gay people. But once you get to know someone like Robb, and I got to know him, and the courage that I saw, and the sense of humor, the lack of fear in the face of death, how can you not respect someone like that? I could no longer say, he doesn't get the same rights as I do. And I started realizing that my attitudes were changing. And, you know, after that, I've argued all along for gay rights and gay marriage, same-sex marriage. Why should they not have the same rights as me? Robb helped me change in that way. The last interview I did with him, he was sitting on the couch and he was obviously very close to the end. And I decided not to be a reporter. And I said, I love you. And he said, I love you too. And I said, your death is going to help my career. I said, I'm having a hard time with that. And he said, go for it. He said, I'm behind you all the way. That's the kind of guy he was.
Welcome back. We're now joined by Ken Gullett, the man behind the original Robb's Life series, and also the reason that this story still lives on today. Thanks so much for being here, Ken.
You're welcome.
Well, I don't use the word visionary lightly. I mean, your cameras went everywhere with Robb, and this was before reality TV became as popular as it is today.
Yeah, they asked me originally to kind of recreate with someone a series done in Canada where the person with AIDS sat in front of the camera and talked every week. And I thought, well, we can do better than that. We can actually show his life.
And I think that's what really captured the audience the way it did. You really felt like you were sort of experiencing it right along with Robb. Well, we just saw that powerful story talking about the changes that doing the story provided for you. And I just want to commend you for being able to stand up and say, hey, this is the guy that I was, but this is the guy that I am today.
And I think it's important that we're taught a lot of things growing up. Sometimes we hear it from religious leaders and our parents, but we grow up in a certain culture that sometimes teaches us the wrong things. And anytime you dislike a group of people, it's just wrong. And this was one of those cases where I realized that, and that was the last hurdle that I had to get over from growing up in the South. And it's once you get to know somebody like Robb, and you fall with them and watch them playing with their dog and laughing, and it's such a brave person and so determined and passionate about his causes, you can't dislike them.
And I'm glad you brought up religious leaders, because that's something I wanted to talk to you about. We talked about it before, but I wasn't able to incorporate it into the story. This role of a religion, a lot of people think of it as something that involves love and compassion, but it can also sort of be a force of exclusion.
Well, it can be a very negative force, as you see every day on the news these days around the world. And so there are people who do it right. There are people like Jimmy Carter, who grew up and was very tolerant and concerned about civil rights. Martin Luther King. There are so many people who have it right, but so many who don't. And anytime you use it as a weapon against someone else, whether they aren't covering their head properly, whether they are not loving the person you think they should be loving, then that's not what it should be about.
I think that's such a great point. Well, we talked about how you're allowing this story to continue and grow. Tell us about your blog, Ken.
In April, I used to go in with Robb to do stories, and people would walk in and they would stop because of the camera, and he would point to me and say, you can trust him. And that rang in my mind for years. So as the 20th anniversary approached, I thought, let's do a blog and we'll run the stories in real time. Every week, the new story that aired 20 years ago goes up until April of next year.
And I definitely encourage folks to watch the original series. Your blog is also a place for people to make donations to De La Cerda House, right?
Yes, it's robbslife.org, no apostrophe, 2 B's, robbslife.org, and there are links in there where you can donate to the De La Cerda House. It's still very much needed. There are still people ostracized. There was one young man who had to sleep in his car in his mother's driveway because she wouldn't let him live in the house because he had HIV.
And very quickly, I do want to talk about the work that Robb did with De La Cerda House. I don't know if it came through in the stories, but he sort of helped to begin creating these homes for people living with HIV and AIDS, right?
He and his father, Lorne, and a good friend, Ray, and other volunteers took an abandoned house and turned it into a place where HIV and AIDS clients could live. It's still there in Rock Island. It's called Robb's House, but the De La Cerda House has other facilities, and they need support.
All right, and you can support them by going to Ken's blog. Again, I encourage you to watch the original miniseries as well as make a donation to De La Cerda House if you can. Ken, so glad to have you this morning.
Well, thank you, and thanks to Channel 4 for recognizing the story and doing a lot of good.